Starting a research project from scratch can be quite overwhelming. This is especially true in the digital humanities, where it is not uncommon to be working on a project that spans multiple disciplines, each with their own different expectations. What experienced researchers will tell you is that when they first got started, it was important for them to follow a clear process to move from their general idea to their specific research question, so that they could make their digital humanities research understandable to other disciplines that might want to engage with their research. They had to take into account what type of research they wanted to do, what data they wanted to work with, who their audience was for the project, and what results of their research they wanted to produce. This presentation will guide you through the process of developing your very first digital humanities research project and ensuring its success. We'll focus on crafting solid, valid research questions that are tied to digital technologies. We'll ask, what are the components of a research idea? How do you formulate a research question? And how do you know your research idea is a good one? We'll also talk about how to identify an audience for your research and what types of research products frequently come out of the digital humanities. A humanities research project will typically be comprised of 5 primary components: a question, problem, or provocation, the use of sources or data, a sequence of research activities, an audience, and concrete products that result from your research activities. And the digital humanities is no different in this regard. Indeed, thinking about each of these components from the outset will allow you to not only develop your research idea, but will predispose you to providing clear answers to exactly what your research will ask, what materials you'll use to arrive at your answers, who the audience will be for your research, and what products others might expect to result from the project. It's important to remember, though, that a research idea is not the same thing as a research project. You need to have a good, strong idea before you can begin working on the project, but the project itself is more sophisticated. And at the outset of any project, new researchers often face one of 2 common scenarios. They either have so many potential research ideas that they don't know which one they should start with, or they have only a vague idea of what they'd like to research, and thus feel like they don't have enough information to move forward with their project. To help you avoid finding yourself in one of these scenarios, ask yourself some key questions that will help you focus your thoughts and help you identify a viable research project. What are you passionate about that you could use as the core of your project? What knowledge do you already have that can contribute to a research idea? What is the major issue, challenge, or bone of contention in your field? And what is an area of study that you share with others around you that you might wish to collaborate on? In the humanities, our research questions are often guided by such factors as what primary source materials are easily accessible on the topic, contemporary discussions of the proposed topic, or historiography produced by previous scholars. Each of these ways of approaching a research idea to narrow it down into a viable project remain valid in the digital humanities. Yet, because we engage with digital technologies, we also have valid research questions associated with the specific technologies or platforms we'll be developing or using as part of our research endeavor. For researchers new to this process, having to manage not just the humanities questions, but also these digitally inclined questions can sometimes seem insurmountable. But don't panic. What many experienced researchers in the digital humanities will tell you is that humanities questions influence technical questions and vice versa. DH then isn't just the use of computing tools, it is the development or deployment of computing tools and or platforms to enable, and that's the key word here, enable humanities research. Your humanities questions and results will often introduce layers of complexity to your use of the tools and suggest new areas of technical development. We'll be talking about tools, including how to go about selecting and evaluating which ones are most appropriate for your project later. Many new researchers in the digital humanities will approach their potential projects without having much knowledge of what previous work in the field has already been undertaken. Knowing where to turn to acquire this knowledge can often appear quite daunting when you're just beginning in a new field. But just as a historian might undertake a historiographical review, or a literary scholar would conduct a literature review of their topics, digital humanists can get a sense of the current state of the field by looking at the recent scholarship of others. Digital humanists frequently discuss their research process in a variety of different mediums, most commonly in the form of project blogs, personal websites, Twitter conversations, and even in the comment or discussion feeds of other people's blogs. By identifying scholars who are doing similar research, you can easily identify and participate in discussions surrounding work that is ongoing or recently completed. Another potential starting point is by looking at journal articles. Digital humanities publications, as well as a growing number of traditional humanities publications, have sections that highlight not just the successes of existing projects, but also pose questions for further development. At the outset, I'd encourage researchers to partner together to provide a support system, even if it is just an informal partnership. This will allow you to have someone to work with you as you develop your research questions and make decisions about how to move forward. In the digital humanities, collaboration is strongly valued, so it isn't unusual to see teams of researchers working together where each researcher has primary responsibility for one part of a larger research question. Indeed, many senior digital humanists today got their start in the field by working as part of a research team. One of the best ways of forming a collaboration, especially for scholars who've been working in their specific humanities disciplines extensively, is to consider forming a working group around your topic or method. This can be in person or through digital channels such as Twitter or via platforms like Slack, which allows you to share information, discussion, and provide a support system for one another. This can, of course, also be done on a classroom, departmental, school, or campus basis. In fact, some of the best digital humanities work has developed as a result of the dialogue between researchers at a single institution. New researchers are often surprised when told that some of the best digital humanities research questions are questions drawn from previous humanities research. It is not developing a totally new question that makes the project exciting, but instead the taking of a different approach, offering a new theoretical lens, or the application of a new method that hasn't been used widely. Take, for example, a relatively straightforward historiographical question. What is the role of Richmond, Virginia in the American Civil War? This is actually something that has been the subject of debate for a long time. Writing in 1865, the noted Civil War journalist George Alfred Townsend declared that Richmond, which was the Confederate capital, remained a mystery to most Northerners. Meanwhile, writing over 125 years later, the historian Kenneth Noe echoed the sentiment by noting that Richmond and the experiences of its inhabitants had largely been ignored in histories of the American Civil War. This gap in our knowledge of the social and political lives of those people who lived in the Confederacy's capital city provided the inspiration for historian Robert K. Nelson to launch his digital humanities project, Mining the Dispatch, which seeks to uncover and explore the myriad ways in which Richmond changed over the course of the war. The project's research idea, however, was not just to explore Richmond, but to use a relatively new digital technique to help arrive at their answers, in this case, topic modeling. As Nelson summarizes in his introduction to the project, topic modeling uses statistical techniques to categorize individual texts and perhaps more importantly, to discover categories, topics, and patterns that we might not be aware of in those texts. Nelson and his team developed 40 different topics that could be used to help better understand their primary humanities question of what Richmond's role was during the war. For example, they were able to identify statistically significant peaks in how the Union Army presented African American slaves with the opportunities to seek freedom by escaping behind Northern Army lines. This allowed the team to then interpret these peaks through more analog humanities knowledge of the proximity of the Union Army to the Confederate capital of Richmond. Graphing fugitive slave ads in this way helps to bring these historical moments into stark relief, while the larger project provides a model of how topic modeling could be used on historical newspapers of this period. A second project, Viral Texts, further illustrates the interrelated nature of humanities questions and digital tools. This project articulates its research questions in a way that would be familiar to many linguistic scholars, regardless of their experience with digital tools. The team writes that their motivation was to understand what texts were reprinted and why. How did ideas, whether literary, political, scientific, economic, religious, circulate in the public sphere and achieve critical force among audiences? The Viral Texts team, however, recognized that computational linguistic tools could allow them to ask these questions on a much larger scale than has previously been possible. Using over 500,000 texts drawn from the Library of Congress's Chronicling America project, Viral Texts hopes to expand our scholarly ideas of which writers resonated with 19th century readers and create new bibliographies of popular but critically overlooked literature. Part of what makes both of these projects such great examples is that their websites call out not just their topic, but also their research questions and problems clearly and directly. For Dispatch, Nelson and his team were interested in testing out topic modeling to see if his method could shed light on Richmond, Virginia. For Viral Texts, Ryan Cordell and his collaborators wanted to develop text mining, network analysis, and visualization tools to explore their corpus of material. Their joint problem was the same. Can these tools, which have been developed in one particular subfield, be applied to bodies of materials drawn from a totally different field? By laying out exactly what your research question or problem is, you make it easy for others to understand not just what you are talking about, but what your core research question or problem is. New researchers often get tripped up when others read their first paper or evaluate their digital project. They forget to state exactly what their research questions are and how they will arrive at the answers. Communicating your research questions simply and in direct language then is valuable as a first activity. It allows you to set the stage for your project and potentially identify what sources and tools you'll need to answer your question or problem. The next stage in your research project is to identify what data you might be able to use. The digital humanities has a strong open data ethos, where we encourage researchers to use and publish the data they work with without any restrictions on copyright, licensing, or other mechanisms of control. Unlike the sciences, where there are clearly established data repositories for topics like astronomy, genomics, and physics, there is no single place where you can find humanities data. In fact, humanities data repositories are prolific precisely because there isn't any one single repository for them. Libraries, archives, museums, galleries, universities, corporations, individuals, and communities might all have data available for you to use in your project. Even commercial social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter can provide you with data to explore. Further complicating the process of identifying potentially useful data is that many data sets are not discoverable by major search engines such as Google, DuckDuckGo, and Bing. Furthermore, not all digitized materials available online are actually non-copyrighted or license-free, meaning that you might have to request permission of the owner of the data before you can use it in your own project. As a result, the very first step as you go about finding data is to make sure to take a look at the copyright, licensing, and permissions rules on any data you might find. The worst thing in the world that you can possibly do is build a research project around data that it turns out you can't actually use. So, with all this in mind, let's get started with advice on how to identify your data. And the first thing is very simple, start with the local. And by that, I don't necessarily mean where you live, although it might be a library or archive that is in close proximity to you. But what I'm actually referring to here is start with archives, museums, or groups that are local to your particular humanities research questions. If, for example, you're interested in creating three-dimensional simulations of Pontiac's War, which is a 1763 war between British troops and American Indians of the Great Lakes region, you would likely want to start with the local and state libraries and archives in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and New York to see if they have digitized any materials they have about the war. And it's worth highlighting again here that this is the same type of humanities research process you'd be doing if you weren't working in the digital humanities. For your first project, you might be interested in doing something related to where you work or live. In that case, contact your local librarian and archivist for their assistance. It is quite likely that they can not only provide you with access to data on your particular topic, but they might also be able to help you identify potential research questions that their materials could help answer. Special collections and university archives, as well as historical societies and state libraries, are particularly good places for getting pointers on potential humanities research projects. The next step is to continue with type-specific or organization-specific repositories. There are a handful of format-specific repositories that are of use to digital humanists. These are repositories that are available for public use that are generally divided according to whether they provide access to textual data, such as newspapers, books, poetry, or other articles, or image data, like photographs, maps, films, or three-dimensional objects. The most famous textual dataset that is currently being used by digital humanists is undoubtedly the collection of materials that comprise over 3 million public domain volumes digitized by Google. Known as the HathiTrust Research Collection, these materials represent a variety of languages, subjects, and dates that are freely available for scholarly research. Other commonly used repositories of text-based information include the Oxford Text Archive, which holds materials in 25 languages, JSTOR's Data for Research service, which provides downloadable datasets of both scholarly journal literature and a set of primary sources, and the Library of Congress's Chronicling America repository, which offers access to digitized American newspapers. Many of these groups offer researchers the ability to download their collections in a variety of different formats so that they can be easily incorporated into scholarly work. Viral Texts, for example, made use of a service provided by the Library of Congress known as an Application Programming Interface, or API, that leveraged material to download a subset of materials and compile its dataset of newspapers from the Chronicling America repository to help answer their research questions. Museums of all sizes have also begun to digitize their collections to make them more accessible to the general public, but they are also increasingly making their holdings readily available for use by researchers. Numerous museums and libraries offer datasets of textual and image data that can be used to not only explore the objects themselves, but also the collecting practices of major institutions. To familiarize yourself with and discover what materials are available, it is always worth sitting down and exploring the digital holdings of an archive you have identified as potentially of use through their built-in search engines. If you're just getting started as a digital humanist, it's quite possible that you are thinking of your data primarily as digital surrogates of traditional humanities sources. But because you are now operating in digital environments as much as you are your own humanities discipline, you also need to think outside of your usual patterns. Social media and sharing platforms such as Flickr, Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit are all places where you can harvest data that might be of use in your project. The Internet Archive, for example, has released an archive of public Reddit comments dating from October 2007 until May 2015 that can be freely downloaded and analyzed by researchers. Perhaps you want to capture how people talked about the World Cup as matches were being played. Or maybe you want to analyze images that were captured and shared online during a major world event. All of this is possible by exploring the advanced search and data mechanisms that are provided by these platforms. If you're using one of these sources, you do, however, need to be careful to comply to any terms and conditions that the vendors place over use and publication of their data. Twitter, for example, generally prohibits you from republishing datasets that include personally identifying information, such as usernames and profile pictures. Wikipedia can provide you with data to explore in article, book, primary source, or image forms. And for those of you interested in technical data, you can explore GitHub and SourceForge, which are code repositories where you can share, comment, and download software, algorithms, and other code datasets for use in your projects. For example, you might be interested in studying how different code sets can be read as languages, and how Latin as base language for code authoring presupposed a Western system of information and learning. Because data is just information that is being represented a different way, there are almost no limits on how you can conceptualize and aggregate it. The movie Field of Dreams popularized the idea that if you build something spectacular and amazing and wonderful, an audience will just naturally find it and discover it and make use of it. Unfortunately, the truth is very different, and that is not the case. Having said that, though, audiences plays an important role in the digital humanities, just as it does in the humanities more generally. Although there is the popular trope of the scholar hidden away in a deep, dark hole for years, plodding away at understanding some obscure passage or event, the humanities are, in fact, deeply engaged with the audiences it wants to reach. Every day, researchers reveal new knowledge that becomes part of our cultural, social, political, and legal fabric. The first principle of identifying your audience for your research project is also, however, the most troubling. You are not the audience for your project. You should be excited, passionate even, about conducting your research. But you need to recognize that the vital aspect of humanities knowledge is the communication of that knowledge with others. This might be in the form of classmates or professors, colleagues, disciplines, or the general public. The most effective digital humanities projects, just as the most effective humanities projects, are ones that treat their audience as a community with which to engage in a dialogue. Feedback provided by members of your audience can help you refine or broaden your analysis, fix technical errors, or even point you in entirely new research directions. So don't be shy about identifying and pursuing an audience. But how do you go about doing that? When we talk about audience, it's important to determine what form of your communication your audience is most comfortable with. Are they most comfortable with emails, blogs, blog posts, or tweets? Or do they favor more formal types of writing, such as articles and books? What types of technology do they use to communicate? When I first got started in digital humanities research, social media was still in its early stages. So I learned about my audiences primarily by reading articles and books and attending conferences. But now my audience is much more immediate and broad thanks to the use of social media. If you're interested in youth audiences, doing some preliminary research on how youth engage with digital research can go a long way to helping your project receive traction. Similarly, when working with the general public, knowledge about the community you are trying to reach can help you shape not just the content, but the delivery of your project. If you are developing a research project around the holdings of a local library or museum, knowing the demographic profile of their usual visitor can impact what types of research questions and results you might produce. But before we move on from this, two final things that are important to consider as you get started. The digital humanities, unlike many other disciplines, encourages researchers to stay engaged with their audience throughout the process of conceiving and conducting their research. It isn't unusual to have digital humanities research projects that share not just the results of their research with their audience, but the process of their work as well. This can often mean sharing not just sample code and the results of a particularly striking visualization, but also describing what steps weren't as successful as you might have hoped, and how you are adapting your research based on new data or other challenges. I'd encourage you to work as much publicly as you are comfortable with. Doing so not only allows your audience to know what you are doing, but also communicates an underlying sense of value about humanities research more generally. Finally, and most simply, working with an audience helps hold you accountable to the research questions and project goals that you've set yourself. When you have others to dialogue with, you are more likely to complete your project on time and with clear, easily understood results. But digital humanities is also about technology. And for many researchers who are just getting started in the digital humanities, the question of technology, what technology you need to use, how you are going to go about using it, can be one of the most important and stressful decisions that you make. So I'm not going to give specific advice about specific types of technology here. That very much depends on what your individual research ideas and your research questions are. Instead, I'm going to focus on a series of questions and a series of thoughts that you need to go through as you identify and evaluate what you need for your project to work. And the first and most basic of those is, of course, what do you want to do? There are many different types of tools and technologies that are available. Some have been developed by researchers in the digital humanities. Others have been developed by researchers in the sciences. Others are commercial products. There is absolutely no point in using a text analysis tool like Voyant or Mallet if your fundamental question is one that is spatial and that requires the use of mapping tools. You must also be aware of what your budget is. While many digital humanities tools are free, they're free to use. Many tools that have been developed by the community are open source and released to be used in the community. Those might be limited to the specific research questions of the developer themselves, and it might require some sort of effort on your part to develop them and make them usable for your own project. By the same token, however, commercial tools, which might have a broader applicability because they're designed to be used by as many people as possible, might be expensive and have stringent licensing fees attached to them. You also need to consider who's going to be the primary user, who is going to be most comfortable with it. If you are the main person using the tool, using the technology as part of the project, then you need to either make sure it is a tool you already know or a tool that you're going to have time to learn. On the other hand, if you're leading a research team, and which involves a technology developer, you might be able to engage in some of those, engage with some of those tools that require more hands-on work, more time developing and making specific to your project. You might also consider if someone has done a similar project to yourself. If they have, they may very well have released the tools or the code that they used to conduct their own analysis, to conduct their own research, to be available to other researchers. Which leads into, is there an existing solution that you can use? It is always better, if possible, to use a tool that already exists, because the previous use case scenarios will have ironed out any issues, any problems that it may have. It will make your life a lot easier. And finally, the question you have to ask is, do you have to build something from scratch? And just getting started, I would highly encourage you to avoid building something from scratch. How do you find those tools? Well, through the same types of processes that you would to identify other issues. Blah. So how do you go about finding those tools, identifying what tools are most appropriate? Again, there can be an overwhelming number of tools in the space that you're working in, and knowing which is the most appropriate, which is the best one that is best suited for your specific needs, can be quite challenging when you're just getting started. There are, of course, a number of different resources that are available to you. You can ask the IT staff at your institution what tools they support. This has the advantage of potentially providing you with support at your institution that you will not have to pay for. IT staff that are already familiar with a tool or product are going to be able to help you. You can physically or virtually, as the case may be at the moment, visit with them to learn how to do it, learn how to use it. You can also use Google, but be careful, because Google is never the definitive answer. Or you can rely on professional organizations like National Council on Public Humanities Digital Media Working Group has recommendations. You can look at projects that have been funded through the National Endowment of the Humanities Office of Digital Humanities. You can refer to community resources such as the DH Slack. The other place to look, of course, is through scholarly literature and scholarly networks. Reviews in Digital Humanities, which is a monthly journal that launched earlier this year, offers in-depth reviews of projects and tools. DH Quarterly and Digital Humanities Now are both online resources that regularly highlight different tools and different projects. And of course, you can look at conference and workshop proceedings and the publication of recent books to see what the state of the field currently looks like. As part of that process, you need to evaluate how appropriate that tool is for you. And again, there are a couple of things that you should look at. First of all, what is the uptake in the community, in the digital humanities community, in your specific sub-discipline within the DH or within the humanities? If many different projects have used that tool, it's a good sign that it is a strong, robust tool that is well supported. Likewise, if it has recently been updated, that is a good sign that there is an active developer who will be able to help you with any issues or problems that come up. Take a look to see what resources are available on the project's website to help a new user get started with that tool. Look for detailed documentation on those websites. Look for screencasts or step-by-step instructions. You can go to resources such as the Programming Historian, which has tutorials for a number of different tools that are commonly used in the digital humanities. Look for things that are easy to follow, easy to understand, and that use that use community standards in terms of access, in terms of the code base that they are that they have been built on. Perhaps the best advice, though, that I can give you in terms of technology is this quote from Confucius: "Do not use a cannon to kill a mosquito." And what I mean by that is, simply don't overcomplicate things. Different tools have different purposes. Different tools have different levels of complexity. Different tools have different functions. To take, for example, the text analysis, a very common form of text analysis is topic modeling. And if you're just getting started out in digital humanities and you're interested in exploring what topic modeling can reveal about your data set, about your corpus of texts, the topic modeling toolkit is a great place to start. It's user-friendly, has a user interface, and you can get some preliminary results very quickly. And for some projects, that is going to be enough. If, however, you have a larger data set than the topic modeling toolkit can handle, if you're interested in some of the more advanced functions that topic modeling is capable of, you might look at Mallet, which is actually the back end of the topic modeling toolkit, but requires you to be able to code and exposes more advanced functionality to you. And then if you have a very sophisticated project, you might consider developing your own custom topic modeling pipeline that is written in Python and/or R. As you're working on it, as you're working on your project, and making decisions about what technology to use, again, some questions to ask yourself. Can you maintain the technology yourself now? Can you maintain it in 5 years' time? Those are two very different questions, but they're actually very important things to consider, especially for longer term projects. You need to ensure that that a project is that the technology, just as much as the project, is sustainable for an extended period of time. Connected to that, does the technology require long-term investments, whether that's in the form of job changes or resource reallocations, continued funding through subscriptions? Are you overestimating your team's experience with a particular technology? It's very easy to overcommit yourselves and to look at a particular technology in the early stages of development of a project and think that you absolutely and your team will absolutely have the resources to learn it, to maintain it, to support it, to implement it. When you get down to it, you may find that you have overcommitted. And then when you're in doubt, if you're not sure about what's about technology, experiment with existing tools that have been used for similar projects. See what others have done, what has worked for them. You can always replicate replicate their process with their data as you're learning the project, learning the tool to see what it is capable of before you apply it to your own data set, corpus, whatever it is that you're working with. And then finally, do not be afraid of asking the community, the broader digital humanities community, for support, whether that is the developer of the technology themselves, the users who have used that technology in similar projects, other people that you have come across at workshops or conferences. The DH community is very friendly and welcoming, and you'll almost always find answers to your questions quite readily. And then finally, some common issues that I often see as I'm working with new researchers in digital humanities. Your eyes are bigger than what you actually need to do. Building a full custom project rather than simply improving existing technologies. Don't reinvent the wheel. There is no need to build a topic. There are many pipelines and options available for you with topic modeling. Likewise, custom mapping solutions have been well developed by a variety of different communities and can be easily adapted for the digital humanities. Make sure that your content is kept up to date. There's nothing worse when you're visiting a research project and you discover that links have been broken because no one is maintaining or updating or even producing new content for it. Don't create bottlenecks in your process. Make sure that there are multiple lines of communication, multiple people who have the ability to make decisions, who are able to access the back end of a website in case there is security issues, who know how to renew your domain name subscriptions, those types of things. And then the final thing is to assume that there will always be interest in your project. Many projects have a long life. Some projects only have regular users for a period of months or a couple of years. Both of those models, both of those ideas are absolutely fine. It's simply recognizing what the natural lifespan of your project is and knowing when the time is right for you to be able to let it go. Every research project in the digital humanities communicates knowledge, whether it is the humanities or technological. As a result, for your first project, it's important to consider what form the products of your research will take. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but this gives a wide variety, an idea of the wide variety of different products that are possible in the digital humanities. As you can see, the product of a digital humanities research project doesn't have to be a full-fledged website or a completed code base or published essay. It might actually be a series of posts that you author on your project website or blogging platform that documents what research you attempted. It might explain the questions you had, the ways in which you attempted to transform and analyze particular data sets, and how that exploration failed. In fact, highlighting how your research didn't succeed is valued in the digital humanities. For your first project, you might consider just a few of these concrete products for your research, but it is important, as you increase the complexity of your research, to realize that digital humanists consider a wide variety of things as having worth in academic and public contexts. Keeping a list of what products you could produce during your project's lifespan will also help you draft a work plan to help you organize your work and identify what tools, resources, and partnerships you might need to acquire to accomplish your project. Anything that you do produce from your research should ideally be organized and made available online. If you're affiliated with a university or college, your local library might provide a home for these products. Alternatively, you can put them onto a website or have them hosted in an open repository such as GitHub. Making your products available online and in an indexed repository in this way enhances the discoverability and reuse of your research products by others, which in turn can increase the impact and reach of your own work. Just as we've asked you to think about how to identify your audience, it's also important to consider how you might track the impact of your project. Impact can be measured in concentric circles: the impact of the research on you in terms of knowledge acquired and lessons learned, impact of the research on colleagues, collaborators, or partners, the broader ways in which your research changes the field, discipline, method, or approach, and the ways in which the results of your research are used by others in their research products, in their research. When scholars in the humanities talk about tracking the use of their research products, they are generally referring to tracking the citation of books and articles, as well as things like sales figures. But in the digital humanities, you should also consider tracking things like the frequency of mentions in print and social media, the distribution of your research to various networks, as well as online citations and reproduction of products inside your larger project. Retweets, reposts, follows, comments are all useful to gather by archiving tweets. You can use analytics services such as Google Analytics to provide real-time monitoring data of your website or mobile app. And these allow you to see the location, platform, and duration of visitors to your products down to specific web pages and embedded media. So that all being said, and as we wrap up, let's think about how do you know that you have a good idea? How do you know that your research project is going to be set up for success? And I think there are a couple of things that you can always ask yourself. First of all, does your project, does your idea have an audience of more than simply you? Again, there's something to be said for self-edification and for self-knowledge, but a project has value in what it tells others about your topic. If it challenges assumptions, if it says something new about those topics, about those questions, that's something that gives it value, that will make it appealing to others within your disciplinary community. It innovates a new method or approach. It might be that it provides a new way of using topic modeling or spatial analysis. It may use new techniques, new technologies that have been developed by other disciplines and applies them to a humanities data set in a new and unusual way. It might provide access and interest in your topic or institution to a broader public audience. Making materials available to that broad audience is an important and valuable contribution. It makes a clear statement about its own value. You don't have to make excuses for why it is a good idea. The project itself should speak for itself. And it improves on work that others have done. And then finally, the other side of that, of course, is what's a bad idea. And there are various aspects of that. The first of them is thinking that only your opinion or work on the project matters. Digital humanities work is naturally collaborative. Yes, there are examples, many examples of projects that are the work of a single researcher that are successful, that have value. But when you are working collaboratively, work as a team, value the expertise of everyone involved in that project, from a undergraduate researcher right the way through to the senior PI. It's never a good idea to start a project without fully committing to it and understanding what that commitment is going to look like. If you cannot dedicate the time that you need to learn the tools, to conduct the research, to become familiar with it, to carry it through a multi-year life cycle, you have to question the value of the project itself. Likewise, don't simply try and repeat what someone else has done. Yes, you can take inspiration from work that others have done. You can take that, take a tool, take a workflow and apply it in different ways. But make sure that you're adding value to it, that you're doing something new and innovative to it at the same time. And then finally, make sure you understand what success for the project is going to look like. This is the digital humanities work is not easy. It is hard, and knowing what you're aiming for, knowing what you are what you are striving for, is an important part of that. So finally, and to just wrap up, I want to thank you for your willingness to sit through this virtual online presentation. I'm very much looking forward to talking a bit more in person next week during the question and answer stage. And thank you once again for your time.